On that winter evening, when we set out on our long journey, we had no idea that this trip would become our worst nightmare. We were traveling from one city to another, far beyond its borders, and the night had already settled like a heavy blanket, reluctant to let go of us. With forests stretching on both sides, silent and lifeless, we hadn't seen another soul nor a single car. Suddenly, when there were still many kilometers left to the next city, visibility worsened to the point where we could barely make out the road ahead. The friends in the car were starting to get nervous, and we veered off the path a few times. But luckily, we always managed to get back on track. In that fog and darkness, anything could happen. Then, at one point through the thick darkness, we saw a faint light in the distance. There was a hotel. At first glance, it didn't seem significant, just a place to stay the night, perhaps even abandoned, but with lights on the ground floor. We were all exhausted and didn't want to drive any further. The fatigue, the cold, and the dark trees surrounding us like the hands of the dead made us search for shelter. We turned off the main road and drove into the driveway. The hotel was strange. It wasn't an ordinary motel. It looked more like an old, almost historic building. Over time, it had probably lost its charm, but still, it looked somewhat majestic against the backdrop of the surrounding forest. The old wooden facade with cracked windows and a door that seemed to be on its last legs. I could see dim light coming from the windows. Someone was inside. "Let's stop here," my friend who was driving said. "We need somewhere to rest and there's no other choice anyway." We decided to stop. Inside, we were greeted by a strange man, short, thin, with eyes that seemed too bright in the darkness, like someone who hadn't slept for days. His face was covered in wrinkles, and his lips always curled into some odd half-smile. He introduced himself as the hotel's owner, an old man named Charlie. Despite the uneasy feeling, we settled into one of the rooms on the second floor. The room was surprisingly cozy, despite the old, worn furniture. A few hours passed and we began to prepare for sleep. We joked around, but the atmosphere was unsettling, like something was wrong, something was lurking. We all eventually fell asleep, and I had no idea what was about to happen. In the middle of the night, I woke up from a strange sensation. It felt like someone was standing next to my bed. At first, I thought it was one of my friends coming to check if we were asleep, but when I opened my eyes, there was no one there, just darkness and shadows. I tried to go back to sleep, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like someone was watching me. Suddenly, a sound. The door creaked. I jumped up, walked to the door, and carefully opened it. The hallway was empty. Then, as if on cue, the floorboards in the hallway creaked, and I heard footsteps. But I couldn't tell where they were coming from. A strange noise came from the basement. I froze for a moment, then returned to the room to wake up my friends, but thankfully they were still sound asleep. When I came back to bed, I noticed something strange on the table. There was an old photograph. It was of Charlie, but with a young face, and his eyes were filled with an eerie anxiety. The elderly hotel owner had told us that this hotel had belonged to his family for many years, and they had always kept it in perfect condition. I thought it was just another old photograph, but something about it made me feel that something was terribly wrong here. The next morning, we had breakfast in the dining room, but the atmosphere had changed. Charlie was different. He moved around the room as if he didn't notice us. His gaze was blank, and every time he looked at us, I felt like he was evaluating us, like wild animals he'd been wanting to catch for years. When we decided it was time to leave, the fog was getting thicker and the road to the next city was becoming dangerous. We discovered that our car was blocked. All four wheels were buried in snow, and the doors wouldn't open. We decided to find another way out. There was nothing visible outside the hotel, and we anxiously looked around. Suddenly, we heard a loud screech of metal. We found ourselves in the hallway and saw Charlie, with a crazed look in his eyes, climbing the stairs, holding a knife in his hands. His lips twisted into a grotesque smile, and he whispered, "You thought you could leave? No. No one leaves here alive." The hotel had become a trap. We realized we had become part of his nightmare. We tried to escape, but Charlie, like a creature bound to this place, chased us. We jumped into the car, but the doors wouldn't open, and all the electronics had failed. It was freezing outside, and the thick fog made it impossible to see the road, but we couldn't stay here in that horrible trap. I forced myself to calm down and tried starting the engine. After what felt like forever, the motor finally roared to life and we broke free. I gripped the steering wheel, determined to get us out of there. We sped down the dark road, and behind us, Charlie's car roared, his engine howling with a relentless fury. He was right behind us, and I could feel his presence, like a predator closing in. Suddenly, the road became slick. Our tires began to slip, and every turn felt like a battle against nature itself. We pushed the car to its limits, accelerating, trying to outrun the nightmare that was chasing us. Then it happened. On one of the turns, I couldn't correct the trajectory in time, and the car slid. We lost control, and the vehicle skidded off the road. For a moment, we were airborne. Then we slammed into a tree. The crash was deafening. Glass shattered, metal twisted, and everything went black. I lost consciousness, and when I woke up, I was among the wreckage. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the distant rustle of snow and the wind whispering through the trees. To climb out of the car, and that's when I saw it. Through the fog, I could make out Charlie's car in the distance. He had stopped too. Charlie got out of his vehicle, and in his eyes there was an unrelenting fire. He approached us slowly, and with each step, his figure became more menacing. And at that moment, we realized that we would not get out of here alive.